You can think of the saltwater aquarium hobby as split into aquariums that contain corals and then aquariums that only contain fish. So we call those fish only, and then like reef aquariums. Now there is a dimension within that, and it's not rigid. And so this is the fun of it. So you need to choose whether you want to keep only fish or do you want to keep corals and fish. And it does dictate the type of fish you're going to keep. Coral is a type of animal that lives in water. It has a special type of algae that lives within its cells that helps it produce food through, photosynthesis, just like a plant, but then it's also able to catch food out of the water and grow. In general, I would say for a beginner, start with aquacultured corals. What that means is that they have been grown and trimmed in an aquarium system. If you're picking an aquaculture coral, you're getting a coral that's used to growing in an aquarium environment, that are used to the lights that are required to grow corals, and they're used to the aquarium changes or the parameters, like the water parameters that happen within an aquarium daily and weekly and over a month. You're setting yourself up for success as a beginner at the very beginning, and I don't think there's any other way that you should go other than an aquaculture coral. What makes a good aquarium fish? There are thousands upon thousands of fish species, and we in aquariums typically only keep a tiny fraction of those. It stays small. I would say for most people, something that stays under 5 to 6 inches, so something about this size. If you're keeping a smaller tank, obviously smaller is better. A fish that does not have a specialized diet. So I would say an omnivorous fish that is able to eat plant matter like algae, it's able to eat easily frozen food, easily will take like prepared foods like pellets and flakes, and then is colorful, has a cool personality, and actually one of my biggest criteria is that they are not mean. So you would be surprised, there are some very small fish in this on this planet that have some wickedly mean personalities, and they will dominate an aquarium. Find captive bred fish. I don't think a beginner should ever really buy a wild caught fish, and there's a few reasons for that. So the reason why captive bred fish are better, they've only ever seen aquarium life and aquarium food. They're extremely hardy. They are used to aquarium world. They're used to being netted and moved from aquarium to aquarium. They're not fazed by what goes on in the aquarium, like with the maintenance and everything. And they're just much easier to keep. Sometimes they'll be a couple dollars more than a wild caught fish, but the benefits that you get from keeping that captive bred fish and purchasing that is, I would say, 100-fold than buying a wild caught fish. The other benefit is disease. You are basically not gonna have disease within the captive bred kind of community, whereas if you start getting into wild caught fish, especially as a beginner, you really start running into issues with diseases and things. So just to make life easy for yourself, please go get captive bred fish. There's not that many out there. I'm gonna say the companies, they're ORA, which is Ocean Reef and Aquariums, Biota Aquariums. Those are your main sources. They sell through a bunch of other companies. That's where you should get your fish. They sell beginner fish and colorful fish and perfect aquarium fish. Part of the fun of aquarium keeping is the decorative structure that you keep. Comes in all kinds of forms, but the primary way we do it is through rocks. Okay, so you can see I built this rock here. What we do is you get dry rock and you leave it in an aquarium system. Over months, weeks to months to years, it becomes biologically alive. It is, these little bacteria are introduced, they settle in the rock, they grow, and over time they mature. And like a real ecosystem, as they mature, different bacteria become more established and more dominant, and that's what you're hoping for. That's what fights off algae, that's what maintains the system and sort of makes it very balanced over many, many months. You can just put a lump of rock in a tank and it'll do the same thing. You can break it up, glue it together, and create these funky structures. And that is almost a whole hobby in itself. There's people that just love to, it's called aquascaping, that just love to build these rock structures. You notice that all of my rock is quite shallow in the tank. It's very low down. And the reason for that is I really care about the corals. I'm not here to keep rock, I'm here to keep coral. And so by keeping the rock to typically about 1/3 of the height of the tank, it leaves plenty of room for the corals to grow up and really exhibit the corals. Typically, a lot of beginners will end up putting the rock all the way to the top. They'll make the rock look as best they can. It would look incredible, and they don't realize that all the corals are gonna grow on top of it, and you won't even see the rock after a year or so. I like to tell people that you're not really taking care of the coral specifically, you're not really taking care of the fish. What you're doing is taking care of water. If you remember that water is the most important part of this, all of the equipment that we're using is really about maintaining the water quality. And so how do you do that? You do that through special pumps that just circulate water around the rocks and your decorative structure. And then we have some very sort of simple filters. The main principle to know is that an entire aquarium is filtered by bacteria. So you're giving the perfect environment for bacteria to grow on rocks, okay? And then also within the filter itself. And the filter can just be like a box that has a pump that moves water through it. We'll have some sponge and some other stuff in it that helps clean the water. A huge part of what we do in a reef aquarium is trying to optimize flow within the tank. How do we deliver flow in a steady, sort of stimulating way for the corals and the fish without overwhelming these animals? And so part of that is using, one, you have a filter to you have some kind of a filter that is moving water a little bit, but you always need another piece of equipment, which we call power heads. These are just little pumps, little water fans is a simple way to think of it. They're only there to move the water around. You want the whole aquarium water moving in some kind of a circular motion. We call that a gyre pattern. Another important piece of information is that it also removes the waste. So within the live rock itself, water is flowing through that rock down on the microscopic surface. The bacteria are there doing their hard work, but the corals are doing the same thing. The corals are taking in nutrients, they're taking in oxygen, and the flow as it comes through is allowing them to excrete their waste into the water column, and then our filters sort of help remove it, or our water changes as well. So whenever you go to a local fish store, they may give you a filter, but they're pretty much always gonna suggest that you buy a power head. It should be a fundamental part of what you purchase when you get there. Let's kind of discuss why corals need light. So you need lights that simulate the sun, both in the spectrum. Spectrum is the wavelength of a light, and then also the intensity. And all of this is to drive photosynthesis. You can think of it like the leaves of a tree. You can't keep a tree or a plant in total darkness. It's the same thing with coral. You're simulating sunlight, and just as we go through a day and a night, corals need the same thing. So you typically have to set them on a 8 to 12 hour timer or light cycle. I always tell people that it does not have to be from like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. If you're, like me, you work a lot of night shifts, or you're sleeping later when you're up later in the night, you can adjust your aquarium schedule for your needs. So for me, this tank comes on around 10 a.m., goes off around 9:30 p.m. You could theoretically reverse it completely. If you were only up at night, you could theoretically have your tank only lit during the night. But the key is stability in all of these elements we've been talking about. So the light, you don't want to be constantly changing the light colors, the light schedule. You want to do the best you can do to limit that as much as possible. And so with these kind of lights that have different spectrums, you have to pick one that you like. And that can be adjusted over time a little bit at the beginning, but once you kind of settle on the color and the look that you like that works for the corals, you should just leave it. Unless you have a very good reason to change it, you change it very slowly, and you change it over a period of a couple weeks. You don't just change stuff like that, okay? Anything fast in a reef aquarium is not good. Another element of keeping a tropical coral aquarium is that you have to maintain water temperature. These vary around the world. It's more of a range. You're not looking to have the tank 100% of the time on one temperature. So for most people, somewhere between 78 to 81 degrees Fahrenheit is where you want the temperature to be. Most people aim for about 78. How do we do that? We use a special heater. They come in all kinds of shapes and forms. But yeah, you're raising the temperature from room temperature up. And so you need to make sure you have a heater that's appropriately sized for your aquarium system. What I would recommend is that you buy the most reliable one. So you can think of an aquarium kind of like a spaceship. If a piece of equipment breaks, the entire system is done. And so a lot of what we do is called redundancy. I typically have 2 heaters on a special system that monitors the heater's temperature and then also monitors the aquarium temperature and adjusts that. If you've been doing the hobby long enough,
somebody you know or yourself will have a heater that fails and then the whole system is done. If you live, again, in a very cold house or very hot climate, you know, some people in Florida don't even have heaters on their aquarium because their house is typically always warm enough to keep it. And so, you know, there's some variability in it, but the heater is always plugged in. Expect to do something to your aquarium every week, or at minimum every other week. The reason why it changes so much is some people have a lot more fish, or they have a lot more animals in the system, and it maybe just requires a little bit more maintenance. The fundamental part of maintenance of a tank is water changes. A water change is not getting in there. You don't take all of the coral out of the tank and the fish and scrub the tank and then put it all back, okay? Like the old school fish in a bowl. That's not how you do this, okay? So you just drain the tank down a percentage, a little bit, all right? So anywhere from 10%, 25, 50%. You have to remember that part of keeping an aquarium is that the water naturally evaporates, okay? But the salt and the elements or minerals within that water, they don't just evaporate into the air, okay? So they're left behind. Every day you're gonna be evaporating water because you're heating it up, the lights are heating it up. And so water that evaporates in the aquarium, you replace with fresh water, okay? So you remember, like, you're just replacing what was lost. When you're doing an actual water change to clean the aquarium and remove some of the waste and the junk that kind of builds up around the rocks and on the bottom, you are removing salt water and you're replacing it with fresh salt water that you've mixed up in a bucket. And you're adding a very specific amount of salt to make sure that the salinity, or the amount of salt in the water, is consistent and safe for life. Can't mess that up, okay? If you drain your tank 50% and fill it up with fresh water and you don't realize, that will kill your fish tank. So how you do that is you have a tube, you're gonna start a siphon. And so this is a skill that you definitely need as an aquarist. It's just a tube, put one tube in the water and you suck on the other end of it. Because of gravity, you will start pulling the water out of the aquarium naturally. I recommend about 10% weekly, 20% bi-weekly. And you know, sometimes we get lazy, sometimes we're on vacation, it's busy, it's the holidays, and things go a little bit longer. What you're going to be doing over time is getting used to what healthy corals look like, what healthy fish look like, and you'll get in tune with your aquarium just by checking it out every day. Other part of maintenance in an aquarium is, kind of like I said, is your support system. So your flow, your heaters, and your lights are all fundamental to the workings and the maintenance of your spaceship aquarium. And so I monthly, every couple of months, will take the pumps out and clean them. You just kind of pull them apart, scrub them with a brush, soak them in some special water that breaks up the algae and everything, and then put them back. You know, people have different schedules for that, but expecting to do that every couple of months, I think, is reasonable. Obviously, scraping the aquarium tank is another part of it. I do that most days. You know, I keep my aquarium next to my bed so I can enjoy it. Cool. Part of the natural world is, it's messy, all right? If you go, most people have swim in a pond or a lake or the ocean, there's dirt, there's foam, there's mud, sticks, and everything that goes with it. An aquarium very much is the same way, and you should not be looking for a sterile aquarium. You want algae, you want different little bugs to be growing. It's part of what creates the ecosystem and the stability and allows all of these organisms to live together in an aquarium. And part of the beginning phase of an aquarium is dubbed the ugly phase. I want everyone to understand that it's normal, and it's nothing to freak out about. It's completely normal. A lot of people go through a couple months of this. They think that they're doing terrible. It's 100% just part of the journey. And so the ugly phase, you should expect that it happens. It's where algae will take over your tank for a little while. It comes in all kinds of different colors, shapes, lengths, and forms. Expect it to be there. Just continue doing your water changes. And over time, over a few months, it will typically gradually go away, especially as you have more corals in the tank. They use up the waste that the algae is often using, and over time it kind of balances out. Yeah, so where do you go to learn all this stuff? So obviously this video is very introductory. Please go to a local fish store. All over the country, there are so many fish stores that are focused on saltwater aquariums. Those people are so passionate. You know, I worked in the aquarium industry, in the retail world for over 10 years. I had so much fun doing it and teaching people how to do this. If you find a good store that's especially one that focuses on specialty saltwater, they're gonna help you, right? They want you to come back. And so for the most part, you're going to get really good information. They're going to guide you really, really well, and they'll be able to then direct you a little bit further.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to discover more hobbies and visit notjusthehobby.com to learn more.